In a Massachusetts prison cell in 1946, a 21-year-old convict made a decision that would reshape American history. He had an 8th-grade education, a criminal record, and a 10-year sentence. His name was Malcolm Little. Within 7 years, he would emerge as one of the most articulate voices in America. This is not a political story. This is a story about transformation, strategy, and the power of disciplined thinking. Malcolm X's life offers lessons that transcend any single movement or era. Before we examine his organizational strategies and public impact, we must understand his most profound achievement, the complete reconstruction of his own mind. Born Malcolm Little on May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska, his early years were marked by tragedy and displacement. His father, Earl Little, a Baptist minister and organizer, died under suspicious circumstances when Malcolm was 6, an event officially ruled an accident, though the family believed otherwise. By age 13, Malcolm's mother, Louise Little, suffered a mental breakdown and was institutionalized. Malcolm and his siblings were separated into different foster homes. The young man who had once been an excellent student grew disillusioned with formal education after a teacher told him that aspiring to become a lawyer was no realistic goal for a Negro. He dropped out after 8th grade. By his late teens, Malcolm had moved to Boston and then Harlem, where he descended into street life. He became involved in gambling, drug dealing, and burglary. In 1946, at age 20, he was arrested and sentenced to 8 to 10 years in prison for burglary. This could have been the end of his story. Another young man consumed by the criminal justice system. But something extraordinary happened in that prison cell. Malcolm later described himself during this period as being at the bottom of the American white man society. Yet it was precisely this rock-bottom moment that became his foundation for rebuilding. Malcolm's younger brother Reginald visited him in prison and introduced him to the Nation of Islam, a religious movement led by Elijah Muhammad. While the religious aspects provided initial motivation, what truly transformed Malcolm was something more universal. He discovered the power of self-education. Malcolm later recounted how he was frustrated by his inability to express himself in letters. His vocabulary was limited. His penmanship was poor. So he began a self-directed educational program that would rival any university curriculum. He requested a dictionary from the prison library and began copying it page by page. He didn't just copy words. He studied their meanings, their origins, their usage. He read every book in the prison library he could access. Philosophy, history, literature, religion. Malcolm consumed knowledge with an intensity that astonished both guards and fellow inmates. He would read late into the night, using the dim light that filtered into his cell from the corridor. This wasn't casual reading. Malcolm approached education with the strategy of a military campaign. He studied world history to understand power structures. He examined language to master communication. He analyzed philosophy to develop his critical thinking. He read about civilizations that predated European colonialism to reconstruct his own historical narrative. The lesson here extends far beyond Malcolm's specific situation. He demonstrated that education is not something done to you. It's something you can take for yourself. No teacher can give you curiosity. No institution can grant you discipline. These qualities must be cultivated from within. When Malcolm X was released from prison in 1952, he had completed the equivalent of several college degrees through sheer self-direction. But more importantly, he had developed something more valuable than any credential. He had learned how to learn. He had transformed his mind from a consumer of circumstances into an architect of possibilities. The man who walked out of prison bore little resemblance to the street hustler who had entered. Malcolm Little had died in that cell. Malcolm X had been born. His journey from incarceration to intellectual liberation offers a timeless lesson. Your current circumstances do not define your ultimate destination. Strategic self-education and unwavering discipline can transform not just what you know, but who you are. In 1952, Malcolm X emerged from prison with a weapon more powerful than any he had carried on the streets: the ability to articulate complex ideas with devastating clarity. Within a decade, he would be debating at Oxford University, commanding the attention of international media, and delivering speeches that are still studied in communication courses today. But his mastery of language didn't come from natural talent. It came from systematic, strategic practice. Understanding how Malcolm built his communication skills offers a blueprint for anyone seeking to amplify their influence. When Malcolm X joined Temple No. 1 in Detroit after his release, he was assigned a small, struggling congregation. The Nation of Islam was a marginal organization, virtually unknown outside of a few urban centers. Malcolm had knowledge from his prison studies, but knowledge without communication is like fuel without an engine. He began by observing Elijah Muhammad's speaking style, noting what resonated with audiences and what fell flat. But Malcolm didn't simply imitate, he analyzed. He studied the structure of effective arguments, the rhythm of persuasive speech, the power of strategic pauses. He noticed how certain words carried emotional weight, while others conveyed precision. Malcolm applied the same disciplined approach to public speaking that he had applied to self-education. He would practice speeches alone, testing different phrasings, timing his delivery, refining his arguments. He understood that communication wasn't just about what you said, it was about how, when, and to whom you said it. One of Malcolm's most remarkable skills was his ability to adapt his message and delivery to different audiences without compromising his core principles. When speaking in Harlem, his language was direct, colloquial, filled with references his audience would immediately recognize. When addressing university students, his vocabulary became more academic, his arguments more philosophical. When engaging with journalists, he delivered quotable sound bites designed for maximum impact. This wasn't manipulation. It was strategic communication. Malcolm understood a fundamental principle that modern communication experts still teach. Effective messaging meets people where they are. You don't change your truth. You change your translation. In 1953, Malcolm was appointed assistant minister at Detroit's Temple No. 1. By 1954, he had become minister of Temple No. 7 in Harlem, the Nation of Islam's most prominent location outside of Chicago. His congregations grew exponentially. People came not just for the message, but for the messenger. They came to witness someone who could take complex historical, social, and philosophical concepts and make them immediately understandable and relevant. Malcolm's effectiveness as a speaker was built on meticulous preparation. Before major speeches or debates, he would research his audience, anticipate counterarguments, and prepare responses. He studied current events obsessively, reading multiple newspapers daily, analyzing different perspectives, identifying inconsistencies in mainstream narratives. When Malcolm appeared on television, a relatively new medium in the 1950s, he understood its unique demands. Television required brevity, visual presence, and memorable phrasing. While many speakers of his era struggled with the transition from radio and print to television, Malcolm adapted immediately. He spoke in complete, quotable sentences. He maintained eye contact with the camera. He understood that television audiences had shorter attention spans and adjusted accordingly. His debate at Oxford University in December 1964 demonstrated his preparation. Arguing for the proposition extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, Malcolm faced a highly educated, predominantly white British audience unfamiliar with American racial dynamics. He didn't simplify his argument or pander. Instead, he grounded his position in universal principles of human rights and self-determination, using historical examples his audience would recognize. The Oxford Union later reported that his speech received one of the most enthusiastic responses in the organization's history. Perhaps Malcolm's most underappreciated communication skill was his ability to listen strategically. In interviews and debates, he would often let opponents speak at length, carefully noting their assumptions, their rhetorical strategies, their vulnerabilities. Then he would respond not just to what they said, but to the framework underlying what they said. This approach transformed conversations. While others argue about conclusions, Malcolm questioned premises. While others debated tactics, Malcolm examined foundations. This made him formidable in any exchange. He operated at a deeper level of analysis than most of his contemporaries. Malcolm X's communication mastery wasn't a gift. It was construction. He built his skills through systematic practice, strategic adaptation, meticulous preparation, and active listening. These aren't innate talents. They're learnable skills. Whether you're leading a team, building a business, or advocating for change, Malcolm's approach to communication offers a practical framework. Study your craft, know your audience, prepare thoroughly, and never stop refining your delivery. Influence isn't about charisma. It's about clarity, preparation, and strategic thinking. By 1954, Malcolm X had transformed Temple No. 7 in Harlem from a storefront operation with a handful of members into a thriving organization with hundreds of active participants. By 1960, the Nation of Islam had grown from approximately 400 members nationwide to over 40,000, with temples in cities across America. This explosive growth wasn't accidental. It wasn't purely the result of charismatic leadership. Malcolm X had developed and implemented systematic organizational strategies that any leader in any field can study and apply. His approach to building institutions offers timeless lessons in structure, discipline, and sustainable growth. Malcolm understood that organizational growth required more than inspiring speeches. It required a replicable system. He developed a structured recruitment methodology that turned every member into a potential recruiter. This wasn't random outreach. It was strategic expansion based on clear principles. First, Malcolm identified target audiences. People who felt disconnected from mainstream institutions, individuals seeking purpose and structure, those looking for community and identity. He focused particularly on prisons, pool halls, street corners, and barbershops, places where traditional religious and civic organizations rarely ventured. Second, he trained members in a consistent approach. New recruits learned a specific methodology: how to start conversations, how to listen for openings, how to present core ideas in accessible language, and how to invite people to meetings without pressure. This training created multiplication. Each member became capable of recruiting others, who in turn recruited more. Third, Malcolm implemented accountability systems. Members reported their outreach activities, shared successful approaches, and received feedback. This wasn't bureaucratic overhead. It was practical knowledge sharing that allowed the organization to learn and improve continuously. The result was geometric growth. One person recruiting one person per month creates modest expansion. One person recruiting one person who recruits another creates exponential growth. Malcolm built the system. The system built the organization. Malcolm's organizational genius extended beyond recruitment to internal structure. He established clear hierarchies, defined roles, and explicit expectations. Every member knew their responsibilities. Every temple followed the same basic organizational model. This standardization allowed for quality control and consistent experience across different locations. Malcolm implemented rigorous membership standards. Joining the Nation of Islam wasn't casual. It required commitment. Prospective members attended classes, demonstrated understanding of core teachings, and showed behavioral changes before full acceptance. This high barrier to entry accomplished multiple objectives. It filtered for serious participants. It created value through exclusivity, and it ensured that those who joined were genuinely committed. Inside the organization, Malcolm established strict codes of conduct. Members adhered to dress codes, behavioral standards, and lifestyle requirements. No smoking, no alcohol, no drugs, no profanity. These rules served practical purposes. They created visible distinction from mainstream culture. They built discipline, and they improved members' health and economic stability. Critics sometimes viewed these requirements as controlling, but Malcolm understood a fundamental leadership principle. Discipline creates freedom. Members who eliminated destructive habits found themselves with more money, better health, and clearer thinking. The structure wasn't oppressive, it was liberating. Malcolm also implemented sophisticated financial structures. Each temple operated with transparent accounting, regular financial reports, and clear allocation of resources. Members contributed according to their means, but contributions were tracked and acknowledged. This created both accountability and appreciation. The Nation of Islam under Malcolm's organizational influence developed multiple revenue streams: temple donations, member businesses, publications, and events. This diversification created financial stability that allowed the organization to weather challenges and invest in growth. Malcolm encouraged economic self-sufficiency among members. He promoted the development of Black-owned businesses, cooperative economics, and financial literacy. Temple meetings often included practical economic education, how to save money, start businesses, manage credit, and build generational wealth. This wasn't just philosophy. It was practical skill building. The organization established grocery stores, restaurants, and other businesses that served both economic and social purposes. These enterprises provided jobs for members, served community needs, and demonstrated the viability of self-sufficient economic networks. Perhaps Malcolm's most important organizational strategy was systematic leadership development. He didn't try to do everything himself. He built other leaders. He identified promising members, provided them with training and mentorship, gave them increasing responsibilities, and held them accountable for results. Malcolm established minister training programs where aspiring leaders studied theology, public speaking, organizational management, and community engagement. This created a pipeline of capable leaders who could establish and run new temples as the organization expanded. He also practiced strategic delegation. As the organization grew, Malcolm empowered local leaders with real authority while maintaining overall coherence through shared principles and regular communication. This balance between centralized vision and decentralized execution allowed the organization to scale effectively. Malcolm X's organizational achievements demonstrate that sustainable growth requires more than vision. It requires systems. His strategies of systematic recruitment, structural discipline, financial planning, and leadership development created an organization that could expand and endure. These principles apply far beyond any single movement. Whether building a business, a nonprofit, or a community initiative, success depends on replicable systems, clear standards, financial sustainability, and developed leadership. Inspiration attracts people. Systems keep them engaged and effective. In 1964, at the height of his influence and recognition, Malcolm X did something that most leaders find impossible. He publicly acknowledged that some of his previous positions had been wrong. He didn't quietly shift his views. He openly announced his intellectual evolution, even though it cost him organizational support, friendships, and ultimately put his life at risk. This chapter isn't about Malcolm's specific ideological changes. It's about the strategic thinking behind intellectual courage, the willingness to update one's worldview when confronted with new evidence, and the leadership principle that integrity matters more than consistency. Malcolm's intellectual journey took a dramatic turn in 1964 when he made a pilgrimage to Mecca, a religious requirement for Muslims. What he experienced there challenged assumptions he had held for over a decade. In Mecca, he encountered Muslims of all ethnicities, Arabs, Africans, Asians, Europeans, praying together, eating together, treating one another as equals regardless of race. This experience didn't instantly transform his thinking, but it introduced what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that occurs when new information conflicts with existing beliefs. Lesser minds resolve this dissonance by dismissing new information. Strategic minds recognize it as an opportunity for growth. Malcolm wrote letters from Mecca describing his observations. He noted the genuine brotherhood he witnessed across racial lines. He began questioning whether the racial separatism he had advocated was the only viable path forward. This wasn't a rejection of his core concerns about injustice and inequality. It was a reconsideration of strategies and solutions. Upon returning to the United States, Malcolm didn't hide his evolving perspective. In interviews and speeches, he acknowledged that his experiences had broadened his understanding. He said explicitly that he could work with people of any race who were genuinely committed to justice and equality. Malcolm's public evolution came with severe consequences. The Nation of Islam, which had been his organizational home for 12 years, viewed his changing positions as betrayal. Elijah Muhammad, whom Malcolm had revered as a mentor, became an adversary. Former colleagues became opponents. Death threats increased. Most leaders, facing such consequences, would have quietly maintained their previous positions or left public life entirely. Malcolm chose a third path. He acknowledged his evolution publicly while maintaining his commitment to fundamental principles of justice and human dignity. This decision reveals a crucial leadership lesson. Intellectual integrity has costs, but intellectual dishonesty has greater long-term costs. Leaders who refuse to acknowledge change thinking lose credibility when their hidden evolution inevitably becomes visible. Leaders who pretend to have always held their current positions appear dishonest. Malcolm chose transparency, accepting the immediate cost for long-term integrity. He established two new organizations in 1964, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, for his religious community, and the Organization of Afro-American Unity, for broader political and social activism. These new structures reflected his expanded thinking. They were open to people of all faiths and backgrounds who share common goals. Malcolm's willingness to start over organizationally, rather than compromise his evolving convictions, demonstrated another strategic principle. Sometimes growth requires accepting temporary setbacks. He went from being a prominent national figure within an established organization to building new institutions from scratch. This required humility, courage, and long-term strategic thinking. Malcolm's 1964 travels extended beyond Mecca. He visited Egypt, Lebanon, Nigeria, Ghana, and other African nations. He met with heads of state, intellectuals, and activists. These experiences provided him with an international framework that transcended American racial dynamics. In Africa, Malcolm observed newly independent nations grappling with self-governance, economic development, and international relations. He studied how leaders like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana and Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt navigated complex global politics. He recognized patterns and strategies that could inform domestic struggles for equality and justice. This international perspective gave Malcolm a broader analytical framework. He began connecting American civil rights struggles with global anti-colonial movements. He positioned domestic issues within international human rights contexts. This wasn't just rhetorical, it was strategic. By framing civil rights as human rights, Malcolm sought to involve international bodies and create diplomatic pressure. Malcolm spoke at the Organization of African Unity Summit, addressed the British Parliament, and engaged with international media. He was building a global network and repositioning his cause within international discourse. This strategic expansion beyond national boundaries represented sophisticated geopolitical thinking. Malcolm's evolution demonstrated a principle that applies across all strategic endeavors: flexibility in tactics while maintaining consistency in values. His core commitments to justice, dignity, self-determination, and truth remained constant. His strategies, alliances, and specific positions evolved as he gained new information and experiences. This distinguishes strategic adaptation from aimless drift. Malcolm didn't abandon principles when they became inconvenient. He updated his understanding of how to achieve those principles when evidence suggested better approaches existed. He maintained intellectual rigor, constantly testing his assumptions against reality. In his final months, Malcolm spoke about the importance of staying intellectually alive, of being willing to learn, of recognizing that yesterday's answers might not solve tomorrow's problems. He modeled what psychologists now call a growth mindset, the belief that intelligence and understanding can be developed through dedication and learning. Malcolm X's intellectual evolution in his final year offers perhaps his most important leadership lesson: the courage to publicly acknowledge growth. In a culture that often punishes changing positions as flip-flopping, Malcolm demonstrated that genuine leadership requires intellectual honesty even at great personal cost. His willingness to update his thinking when confronted with new evidence, to maintain principles while adapting strategies, and to choose integrity over consistency provide a model for anyone navigating complex challenges. True strategic thinking isn't about being right initially. It's about becoming more right continuously. On February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated while preparing to speak at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City. He was 39 years old. His life was cut short, but the strategic principles he demonstrated continue to offer guidance decades later. This final chapter isn't about Malcolm's death. It's about extracting the practical, applicable lessons from his life. Whether you're leading a team, building a business, pursuing education, or navigating personal challenges, Malcolm's approach to strategic thinking provides a framework that transcends any particular era or cause. Lesson 1. Self-education as foundation. Malcolm's transformation began with a simple decision in a prison cell: to educate himself systematically. This wasn't about earning credentials. It was about building competence. In today's world, where information is more accessible than ever, Malcolm's approach is more relevant than at any previous time in history. The strategic lesson: take ownership of your intellectual development. Don't wait for perfect circumstances, ideal teachers, or complete resources. Start with what you have. Malcolm had a dictionary and a prison library. Today, you have the internet, online courses, libraries, podcasts, and countless free educational resources. The barrier isn't access, it's discipline. Implement Malcolm's approach. Choose a skill or knowledge area relevant to your goals. Create a structured learning plan. Dedicate specific time daily. Even 15 minutes consistently beats occasional marathon sessions. Track your progress. Test your knowledge by teaching others or applying what you learn. Malcolm didn't just read books. He engaged with them, questioned them, and integrated their lessons into his worldview. The modern application is straightforward. Want to improve your career prospects? Systematically develop skills employers value. Want to start a business? Study successful entrepreneurs. Understand market dynamics. Learn financial management. Want to create social impact? Study history. Understand systems. Develop communication skills. Education isn't something that happens to you in institutional settings. It's something you direct yourself. Lesson 2. Communication as leverage. Malcolm demonstrated that effective communication multiplies impact. A brilliant idea poorly communicated dies in obscurity. An adequate idea communicated effectively changes the world. He transformed himself from a street hustler with limited vocabulary into one of the 20th century's most compelling speakers through deliberate practice. The strategic lesson: communication is a learnable skill, not an innate talent. Malcolm studied, practiced, adapted, and refined continuously. He understood his audiences, prepared meticulously, and delivered with clarity and conviction. Implement Malcolm's approach. Practice public speaking in low-stakes environments, meetings, presentations, community groups. Record yourself and identify verbal tics, unclear explanations, or weak arguments. Study effective communicators across different fields and analyze what makes them compelling. Read your writing aloud to catch awkward phrasing. Seek feedback and adjust. In today's digital environment, communication extends beyond in-person speaking. Writing clearly, presenting ideas visually, communicating across cultural contexts, and adapting messages for different platforms are all crucial skills. Malcolm's principle of meeting people where there applies directly. A LinkedIn post requires different communication than a team email, which differs from a conference presentation. The practical application. Whatever your field, improving communication improves results. Engineers who can explain technical concepts to non-technical stakeholders advance faster. Entrepreneurs who can articulate their vision attract investors and customers. Educators who can make complex subjects accessible create more learning. Parents who communicate clearly build stronger relationships with children. Communication isn't separate from your work. It enables your work. Lesson 3. Systems over inspiration. Malcolm built organizations that could function and grow systematically. He didn't rely on his personal charisma alone. He created structures, processes, and training that enabled others to lead effectively. This distinction between inspiration and system separates sustainable impact from temporary influence. The strategic lesson: inspiration attracts, systems sustain. If your success depends entirely on your constant personal involvement, you've built a job, not an organization. If your progress stops when your motivation wanes, you're relying on feelings rather than structure. Implement Malcolm's approach. Document your processes. If you figure out an effective method for accomplishing something, write it down so others can learn it. Create checklists for recurring tasks. Establish clear standards and expectations. Build accountability mechanisms. Train others to handle responsibilities you currently monopolize. In practical terms, this applies everywhere. Running a small business? Create operations manuals so employees can handle tasks without constant supervision. Managing a team? Establish clear decision-making frameworks. Pursuing personal goals? Build habits and routines that function regardless of daily motivation levels. Malcolm demonstrated that discipline and structure aren't constraints on freedom. They're enablers of freedom. Modern productivity research confirms Malcolm's approach. James Clear's Atomic Habits, Cal Newport's Deep Work, and countless organizational effectiveness studies all point to the same conclusion. Systems beat intentions. Malcolm understood this instinctively and built accordingly. Lesson 4. Intellectual courage and adaptation. Perhaps Malcolm's most challenging lesson is also his most important: the willingness to publicly acknowledge intellectual evolution. In an era of social media permanence and cancel culture, this lesson is both more difficult and more necessary than ever. The strategic lesson: integrity requires acknowledging when you're wrong, when you've learned something new, or when your thinking has evolved. This doesn't mean being wishy-washy or abandoning core principles. It means updating your understanding when evidence warrants change. Implement Malcolm's approach. Distinguish between principles and positions. Principles are fundamental values that remain constant: justice, integrity, excellence, service. Positions are specific strategies or beliefs about how to achieve those principles. Principles should be stable. Positions should be flexible based on evidence and experience. When you encounter information that challenges your current thinking, resist the immediate impulse to dismiss it. Examine it seriously. Ask, what if this is true? How would that change my understanding? This intellectual humility doesn't weaken your leadership. It strengthens it. People trust leaders who acknowledge mistakes more than leaders who pretend to be infallible. The practical application spans all contexts. Business leaders who acknowledge market changes and adapt strategies outperform those who rigidly adhere to outdated approaches. Parents who recognize when disciplinary methods aren't working and try different approaches build better relationships. Anyone who treats life as an ongoing learning process rather than a performance of expertise experiences greater growth. Conclusion: the strategic mindset. Malcolm X's life offers a masterclass in strategic thinking that transcends any single cause, era, or ideology. He demonstrated that circumstances don't determine destiny. Strategic responses to circumstances determine destiny. He showed that education is self-directed. Communication is learnable. Organizations require systems. And integrity demands intellectual honesty. These aren't merely historical observations. They're practical principles for anyone navigating complex challenges. The specific issues you face differ from those Malcolm confronted, but the underlying strategic approaches remain relevant. Build your capabilities through disciplined learning. Multiply your impact through effective communication. Create sustainability through systematic organization. Maintain integrity through intellectual honesty. Malcolm's greatest legacy isn't any specific position he held or organization he built. It's a demonstration that strategic thinking combined with unwavering commitment to core principles can transform both individuals and institutions. Whether you're pursuing personal growth, professional advancement, organizational development, or social impact, Malcolm's approach provides a tested framework. The question isn't whether Malcolm X's life is relevant to yours. It's whether you'll apply the strategic principles he demonstrated. Will you take ownership of your education? Will you develop your communication? Will you build systems rather than rely on inspiration? Will you have the courage to evolve your thinking when confronted with new evidence? These decisions are yours to make. Malcolm's life shows that such decisions matter profoundly. His story reminds us that strategic thinking isn't about manipulation or shortcuts. It's about aligning your daily actions with your ultimate values, continuously improving your capabilities, and building structures that enable sustained impact. This is a leadership legacy of Malcolm X. Not what he believed, but how he thought, learned, built, and evolved. These lessons remain as relevant today as when he first demonstrated them. If this documentary provided value, help us share these important historical lessons with others. Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the overlooked heroes who shaped America. Drop a comment below. Which of Malcolm's leadership principles resonates most with your current challenges? How are you applying strategic thinking in your own life? Your insights might inspire someone else in our community. Share this documentary with someone who's navigating personal transformation, building an organization, or simply committed to continuous learning. These stories matter most when they're shared. Until next time, keep learning, keep building, and keep evolving.